For the officials involved in this summit, this is a lot smoother than last year's Vilnius summit. You had President Zelensky crashing around Vilnius, attacking NATO for not giving him a firm enough timeline for Ukrainian membership. The communique is pretty well sorted out here. The form of words is pretty much nailed down. But what absolutely overshadows everything at this summit is the American political choice that looms this autumn. The country that shapes, funds, leads NATO and has done for all the decades of its existence. Nobody's quite sure which of two people, it could of course be someone else altogether, but which of two people right now in the spotlight could be leading it next year. And one member of one delegation said to me, it looks like one of them can barely walk and the other one is a lunatic. As you were saying, for Keir Starmer, this is his first outing on the international stage, his first opportunity as well to reconcile the limited promises he gave in the election with the bold ambitions. And that issue, not least on defence spending, looks like it could be sort of module one for students in the future who will study Keir Starmer's government. They're calling it a celebration. But Russia is testing NATO resolve, and its leadership has never been so uncertain. NATO members are expected to promise Ukraine new weaponry and an irreversible path to NATO membership, but with no date.
Ladies and gentlemen, please look into the camera for 8 seconds.
Prime Minister, good morning.
Hi.
Hi.
In their first meeting since Keir Starmer took office, the Prime Minister told President Zelensky there'd been a change of government, but no change of approach.
Ukraine, because there's a change of government, no change of approach.
On the flight out last night, Keir Starmer confirmed that no change included permission for Ukrainian forces to use UK Storm Shadow missiles on military targets inside Russia. President Biden defensively told Americans to watch how he conducts himself here. They'd see proof, he said, he was fit for office.
Today, NATO is more powerful than ever.
While he was passionately defending NATO, Donald Trump was telling a rally he came to office not sure what it was.
I felt, it's the first time I'd ever done this. I didn't even know what the hell NATO was too much before, but it didn't take me long to figure it out, like about 2 minutes.
President Trump only yesterday said when he came to office he didn't even know what the letters stood for. And he did talk in private about withdrawing from NATO. That must chill your heart.
I do not believe that US will leave NATO because US needs European allies as much Europe needs US.
Trump said it, didn't he?
We have a campaign, and of course this is this campaign is more focused on the domestic issues. We all understand that.
1 year since long neutral Finland joined NATO, the country's foreign minister insists she's optimistic for the alliance. You have President Biden, who believes in it passionately, as you could see from his opening address, and potentially President Trump coming in, who thinks it's just a very expensive burden. It's very different, isn't it? Rather alarming.
Yeah, well, I think we in Finland, in Europe, we should concentrate on issues where we do truly have the influence on, and that is, spending more in our own defense, in our own deterrence, which in itself is important for NATO, strengthening the European pillar of NATO, but that also will make us more attractive partners also for the United States.
Keir Starmer waiting in the wings for his first moment on the international stage. It's only the 6th day of his premiership. Some of the stagecraft is new to him.
The mic. Oh, good. Oh, great.
Because it is an opportunity for our Labour government to reaffirm our commitment to NATO.
The US hosts boomed out movie epic music as the meeting began. Keir Starmer's gleaming and mighty landslide is the envy of quite a few round this table with shakier grips on power. But Keir Starmer didn't risk seeking a mandate to raise taxes and now confronts the challenge of meeting expectations on defence spending and much else without extra money. Here, those with Russia on their doorstep describe a state of affairs which 2% GDP defence spending, or even the 2.5% that Keir Starmer has promised, may struggle to match.
If we look at what Russia has been effectively doing over the course of the past years and months increasingly, which is all sorts of hybrid attacks against all of our countries.
Which is a kind of war.
Exactly. Well, I'm not saying we are in a war.
But it's a type of warfare.
It's hybrid warfare. And if we look at it, I mean, meddling with elections, sabotage, which is a kinetic act, right? So it's not too far away from a true war.
When you look across the border at Russia's war economy, at the hybrid warfare that's already taking place and much else besides, you must think we're at the foothills of what Western democracies are going to have to spend on defense, don't you?
When we look back into history and we see that during the Cold War era we spent 4% in NATO countries to defense, and then we didn't have any war in Europe. Now we have a real war in Europe.
At first sight, Keir Starmer's international debut is to an international body in good shape. NATO's larger, more united, has renewed purpose. But Russia has boosted it and isn't yet defeated. And the future of this organisation may rest on America's popular choice this autumn.
Well, in the weeks leading up to NATO's 75th anniversary summit, President Putin has engaged in a series of diplomatic visits, seemingly timed to send a clear message to the West. Moscow has played host to a series of world leaders and trading partners, which seem to show that despite sanctions and rebukes from the West, Russia not only has strong allies, but wants to offer an alternative to what it perceives as America's international domination. Just hours after striking Ukraine's largest children's hospital, a warm embrace for Putin from the leader of the world's largest democracy, Narendra Modi. While the West tries to cast Putin as an isolated figure, the rest of the world sees things differently. Given the friendship, the US has urged India to persuade Russia to end the war in Ukraine. But despite some coded criticism over the attack on the hospital in Kyiv, Modi used the trip to affirm long-standing strategic and economic ties. And it isn't just Modi. Putin is on a whirlwind of diplomacy, meeting some 20 leaders since he began his fifth presidential term a few weeks ago, courting the global south in part by arguing the West has double standards in its approach to conflicts in Ukraine and Palestine. He visited President Xi in Beijing within days of starting his new term. The two met again just last week. They may no longer talk of a no-limits relationship, but they are trying, and some might say succeeding, to present an alternative to US global influence. Putin has even been to see Kim Jong-un in North Korea, his first visit in 24 years. The careful choreography meant both could appear in control, of the car at least. And so while Putin helps water down international sanctions, in return Russia gets a defence pact, meaning lots of North Korean weapons. And just as worrying for NATO as it meets in DC, last week Putin hosted the current president of the EU Council, who happens to be his longtime friend, Hungary's Viktor Orban, also a NATO member. Putin and Orban both able to argue America is too distracted by its forthcoming election to be a global leader. And, of course, Putin is offering a counterweight. Well, here with me is Anthony Gardner. He was the American ambassador to the EU during President Obama's second term. We're also joined by Lord West, former First Sea Lord and a security minister in Gordon Brown's government. Lord West, first of all, given there's an election in November which could see Donald Trump win, this could be NATO's last chance to push Putin back in Ukraine, couldn't it? Is it rising to the challenge?
I have to say, I don't realistically think there's a risk of NATO not going on beyond this autumn. As has been said by some of your reports, it's probably stronger in some ways, NATO, than it has been for some years. The fact that Finland and Sweden have joined, the fact that the nations are becoming pulled together because of the threat from Putin, and I think it makes NATO and makes people realise how important NATO is. Now, there is an issue with the perception of NATO from the last President Trump, but a lot of his staff were very firmly on the side about it. A lot of his people working as security advisors and things were very, very clear of how important NATO was. So I don't think that that is a real problem. But there are a number of things we have got to get right. And one of the ones is defense spending. And there's no doubt that the Americans, and it's not just recently, but over a number of years, they have felt that we have not spent enough in Europe on our own defense, and we've relied so much on the Americans. And we need to start getting that right. And I think we need to make sure that we do start spending substantially more, because otherwise there will be pressures from America, who are obviously looking at China a lot more now, saying, well, why should we be doing this? Why should we bankroll these people if they won't look after themselves?
Anthony Gardner, is NATO doing enough to future-proof itself from what would happen in America, not least,
The program has made very clear why this summit is so important. And NATO is taking, including at this summit, very important decisions. Speeding up the delivery of the jets, the F-16, speeding up the delivery of the air defense systems, the Patriot missiles. G7 has taken as well, by the way, important decisions about speeding up the financial aid. So there are a lot of other ways in which NATO is doing what's necessary. I actually agree, NATO will go on regardless of Donald Trump. He said many things. I don't think the risk is that he will take the United States out of NATO. The risks, however, is there. He could reduce the amount of troops on the ground in Europe. He could not participate in certain military actions as a deterrent to Russia. And he could threaten specific members of NATO that we wouldn't come to their aid. We need to do more, absolutely. Many countries have actually stepped up their financial defense budgets, but a number of countries, including Spain, are spending much less than 2%, 1.28% in the case of Spain, even less in the case of Belgium, so we need to continue to do more.
But is the truth that you can't actually future-proof the Ukraine policy or support for Ukraine from a sceptical Donald Trump, who may not leave NATO, but just won't support Ukraine the same way?
Well, we're speeding up the decisions, which will mean that Ukraine will have the defense that it needs, at least for a period of time. We can, so to speak, future-proof NATO by convincing Donald Trump that it's doing enough. Not only spending more, by the way, but spending better. This has been talked about for decades. Consolidation of the platforms, there are too many of them, there's a lot of waste, but we haven't done much of it, and Europe now needs to do it.
Lord West, when you see a member of the EU and NATO and Viktor Orban with Putin, when you see the parade of world leaders, including Narendra Modi, giving him a hug, the West hasn't done very well at isolating Putin, has it?
Well, I have to say, I do think it is rather depressing that a great democracy like India has actually been so supportive of the appalling invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And there's no doubt that because Xi Jinping agreed with Putin that he would vaguely support him, provide dual-use materials, bankroll him really economically, taking an awful lot of his resources and things, has enabled Putin to have an economy that is, yes, a war economy, but it hasn't actually collapsed as a result of sanctions and the like. And I do think that is very unfortunate. It is extremely sad. We haven't been able to put more pressure on him. I mean, it's very interesting. For example, there's a whole tanker fleet owned by various Indians now, which basically is running Russian oil, which should be sanctioned. But they're allowing it to go. Therefore, he's got a flow of money. And now he's got this deal with North Korea, and North Korea are providing him with lots of weapons because he has found it difficult to keep up the flow of ammunition and things within Russia. And so these are real problems.
I mean, you may find it depressing, but it's a reality, isn't it? Is the point. I mean, Putin is not isolated, and countries like India will say, we have a population, we need Russian oil. We don't have a better offer from the West, and we're going to pursue our national interest.
Oh, I mean, I think he has got people who are working with him. There's no doubt about that. And there's no doubt he would like there to be a different international world order. I think the countries that are sort of vaguely supporting him, a number of them don't, they'll get what they don't know what they wish for. Because there's no doubt that the world order established at the end of the Second World War has actually been very useful for the world in terms of pulling people up by their bootlaces, growing the world economy, and actually generally keeping a lot of stability. With that being thrown up into the air, goodness knows what will happen. And they will be the ones who suffer probably more than the established countries like the US, etc.
Anthony Gardner, I mean, do we know what the world order is looking like?
No.
I mean, everything's up in the air, isn't it? That's the truth.
A lot of
And
things
it's
are
quite
up in the
scary.
air, partly because of elections, and partly because we live in a more turbulent world. But there's one important point I'd like to make, with your permission. We will not succeed in preparing for that world, including by spending more, if we do not convince our publics that there is a real threat. Parts of Europe don't believe there actually is a threat. Ukraine has changed that to some extent. But recent polls have indicated many people in some countries think that Ukraine is very far away. We need to convince people that even though Ukraine may be far away for some, this is a threat to all of Europe, not just the Baltic states, not just Germany.
That's a major political failure, isn't it?
That is a major political failure. And without that, we're just not going to convince people to spend money on tanks rather than other things.
Anthony Gardner, Lord West, thank you both very much.
Thank you.